Henry Brooks was dying on a gurney in the lobby of Riverside Medical Center, while every doctor in the building refused to touch him. His father, billionaire Richard Brooks, was moments away from losing the only family he had left. And just when all hope seemed gone, a homeless woman pushed through the chaos and shouted the unthinkable, "I can save him. Please let me operate." Henry Brooks was dying, and everyone in Riverside Medical Center knew it. The chaos of the emergency department didn't hide the truth. It amplified it. Nurses moved briskly with clipped voices, monitors beeped in rapid uneven pulses, and the heavy stench of antiseptic mixed with fear hung in the air like a fog. Yet through all the movement, one horrifying reality stood still: no doctor was willing to operate. Henry lay curled on a gurney, gripping the metal rails so tightly his knuckles had turned bone white. Cold sweat rolled down his temples while waves of pain tore through his abdomen. Every few breaths, a strangled groan escaped him, the kind that told anyone nearby that the human body didn't have much time left. His appendix was moments away from rupturing, and everyone in that hospital, from the interns to the senior surgeons, knew exactly what would happen when it did. Across from him, his father stood frozen, his expensive overcoat hanging awkwardly off his shoulders, as if even the fabric was too heavy to bear at a moment like this. Billionaire restaurateur Richard Brooks had weathered lawsuits, hostile buyouts, economic crashes, and scandals that would destroy lesser men. But none of it compared to the terror of watching his only son deteriorate right in front of him while a trained staff of medical professionals refused to intervene. He wasn't a man used to hearing the word no, especially when it came to his family. But that night the word was everywhere, spoken politely, apologetically, even regretfully, yet still with finality. "We're understaffed. We don't have the right surgeon available. The risk is too high. The legal ramifications could be serious." No matter the wording, the meaning was always the same: Henry would not be touched. Years earlier, when Richard invested in Riverside Medical Center and later married Dahlia, the hospital's current director, he believed he was securing his family's health and legacy. Dahlia had promised him the facility would become the safest place in Seattle for anyone to receive care. She had not, however, mentioned the cold politics that governed every department, every decision, every move the hospital made. Dahlia ran Riverside like a corporation, and in her corporation, liability mattered more than human life. Tonight, she was conveniently absent from the air, leaving the responsibility to staff who followed her philosophy obsessively. Every surgeon qualified to handle Henry's case had already refused. Those who hadn't yet refused were nowhere to be found. Richard gripped his son's shoulder, leaning in close. "Stay with me, Henry. You're going to be all right." The reassurance sounded steady, but it was a lie both of them recognized. Henry's breaths came shallow and uneven, as if his lungs were making their last attempts to keep up. The young man, normally athletic and full of energy, now looked frighteningly small beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. His dark hair clung to his forehead, damp with sweat, and his hazel eyes flickered open only long enough to show a flash of panic before sliding shut again. "Dad," he whispered, or tried to, the word barely formed. Watching his son struggle like this was unbearable. Richard's hands shook, something he hadn't experienced since he first opened his business decades ago. Anxiety clawed up his chest, sharper and more relentless than any corporate pressure he had ever faced. He turned toward a nearby nurse. "Please, there has to be someone, a surgeon, an on-call specialist. I'll pay whatever it costs. I'll fly someone in. Just find someone." The nurse swallowed, guilt softening her features. "Miss Brooks, I'm sorry. We've contacted everyone we can. No one is willing to take the risk." "Risk?" he snapped. "He'll die if you do nothing." The nurse flinched but said nothing more. She walked away briskly, pressing a chart to her chest as if that slim folder could shield her from his desperation. A wave of anger surged through Richard, but it was swallowed instantly by the crushing weight of helplessness that followed. Time was slipping through Henry's fingers and his. He could almost hear it ticking inside the hour, each second slicing away another piece of hope. Then the pain hit Henry harder than before. His back arched off the gurney and a broken cry escaped him. The monitor shrilled. Richard panicked. "Somebody help him!" The medical staff shifted uneasily but still did nothing. A few whispered among themselves, avoiding eye contact with the desperate father. Their hands were tied, they would say. The hospital did not authorize emergency appendectomies without a qualified surgeon present. and the only surgeon with the right credentials had clocked out and refused to come back. Henry gasped, gripping his father's sleeve. "Dad, please." The plea shattered whatever emotional barrier Richard had tried to erect. His knees nearly buckled beneath him. He grabbed Henry's hand with both of his own, as though he could physically keep his son tethered to life through sheer willpower. "Ivy got you. I swear, Henry, Ivy got you." He didn't. Not this time. For the first time in his life, all of his influence, money, and connections amounted to nothing. He felt small, powerless, terrified. The air, once bustling with motion, now seemed to warp around him. The harsh fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting sharp shadows that made the room feel colder. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms, matching his rising heartbeat. The world was narrowing to one horrifying truth: his son was dying, because no one in this place cared enough to save him. A paramedic approached hesitantly. "Sir, if the appendix ruptures, he may go septic. If that happens before we stabilize him, don't." Richard's voice trembled. "Don't finish that sentence." The paramedic looked away. Henry curled inward, clutching his abdomen. Tears streamed down his face, whether from pain or fear, neither of them could tell. Watching Henry suffer cut deeper than anything Richard had ever imagined. He would have traded his entire empire for a single competent doctor willing to help. And then, just when despair had almost consumed the room, a sudden commotion erupted near the hospital entrance. A woman's voice rose above everything else, raw, desperate, determined. Someone burst through the double doors, pushing past startled nurses as if propelled by a force far stronger than her frail appearance suggested. A homeless woman in tattered layers of clothing stood in the middle of the air, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her hair was unkempt from life on the streets, her hands trembling, but not from fear, rather from urgency. She stared directly at Henry, then at Richard. "Please," she shouted. "I can save him. Let me operate." For a moment, the entire went still. Nurses froze, orderlies stared. Even the monitors seemed to hold their breath. Richard turned toward her, stunned, caught between disbelief and a desperate hunger for hope. The woman stepped forward, eyes fierce with conviction. "I can save your son," she repeated. "If you let me try." And in that instant, something shifted. Despair cracked, letting through the faintest, most fragile glimmer of possibility. The night was far from over, but now, the story had truly begun. Richard Brooks had faced pressure before, but nothing compared to the suffocating helplessness crushing him as he watched his only son writhe on a gurney. His world, carefully built over decades, restaurants, investments, political ties, wealth that could bend almost any institution, was meaningless inside Riverside Medical Center. Here, influence didn't matter. Money couldn't buy a surgeon willing to act. Protocols and internal hospital politics had more power than the richest man in Washington state. And in this sterile nightmare, Henry's life slipped away minute by minute. Henry Brooks, 21 years old, usually carried himself with vibrant energy. He had inherited his father's charisma, but not his father's imposing presence. He was gentle, thoughtful, always the kind of young man who held the door open for strangers or tipped generously without thinking twice. Now, watching that same boy curled up, sweating and trembling, tore Richard apart. Emergency lighting washed Henry's face with a harsh glow, emphasizing every twitch of agony. He sucked in shallow breaths, each one tighter and more frantic than the last. The fear in his eyes wasn't just fear of death, it was fear of being abandoned by the very system meant to save him. A few nurses hovered at a distance, whispering back and forth. Richard caught fragments: liability, no attending surgeon, Dahlia's orders, each word like a needle stabbing under his ribs. Dahlia controlled this hospital, but she wasn't here yet to see the consequences of her rigid, profit-driven rules. He wanted to call her, scream at her, demand she fix this immediately. But even if she arrived, what would she do? Force a surgeon to operate at gunpoint? The thought almost made him laugh in disbelief. The irony was cruel. The hospital his wealth helped build was the same place refusing to help his son. Across the room, an intern timidly approached a senior physician. "Dr. Shaw, isn't there anything we can do? He's heading into septic shock." Shaw didn't look up from the chart he was pretending to study. "Not without the appropriate surgical team. The risk assessment doesn't allow it." The intern swallowed. "He could die." Shaw lowered the chart, his face stony. "And if he does, the hospital isn't liable. That's the policy. Dahlia's policy." His voice carried just enough that Richard heard every word. Rage surged through him so quickly he felt dizzy. He marched forward until he was inches from Shaw. What policy allows you to watch a kid die in front of you? Shaw stiffened, but fear flickered in his eyes. Brooks, I understand your distress, but without authorization. Richard slammed his fist against the nearest counter. Papers jumped and several nurses flinched. Authorization, my son is dying. What more authorization do you need? Shaw backed up, his attempt at professionalism crumbling. Look, I'm sorry, but no one here is qualified for emergency abdominal surgery right now. The surgeon who could handle this isn't answering calls. Richard stared at him with raw disbelief. He had built empires, negotiated deals worth billions, and crushed competition with strategies that took months of planning. But this needed a miracle, not strategy. All he could do was stand there, feeling powerless, while the medical staff danced around responsibility like cowards hiding behind policy. Henry groaned again, louder this time. His back arched, and he grabbed the side of the gurney with trembling fingers. A nurse rushed over to check his vitals, muttering under her breath in a panicked tone that contradicted her forced professionalism. His fever's rising, pressure's dropping fast, we were losing him. Richard's heart lurched. He leaned over Henry, brushing sweat-soaked hair from his forehead. Hang on, he whispered. Henry blinked slowly, barely able to focus. Dad, it hurts, he gasped. I know, kiddo, I'm right here. He felt totally split in two, one part wanting to break down and scream until the walls shook, the other part forcing himself to stay calm for Henry's sake. He chose the latter, because that's what fathers do, they shoulder the fear so their children don't have to. Across the room, two doctors whispered urgently behind the nurse's station. One shook her head. There's no way, we can't take that risk. If something goes wrong, it's our careers. The other crossed his arms. The director will fire anyone who disobeys protocol. She's ruthless about this stuff. Their voices carried, and Richard felt his stomach twist. Henry wasn't dying because he was untreatable. He was dying because everyone here was terrified of losing their position. When another wave of pain hit Henry, he screamed a raw, desperate sound that made every nearby staff member freeze. Richard felt something inside him fracture. He cupped Henry's face, trying to anchor him. Stay with me, please. But Henry's body shook and tears leaked from his tightly shut eyes. Richard stepped back, his mind racing. If the hospital refused to operate, he needed to get Henry out of here. But transferring him now could kill him before they reached another facility. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts, searching for anyone who might help: private doctors, surgical specialists, medical consultants. But even if they answered, none could arrive fast enough to save Henry. Time was devouring them. A young paramedic approached with caution. Sir, you need to prepare yourself. If his appendix ruptures, the infection could spread faster than we can manage here. Richard glared at him. So do something. The paramedic looked pained but didn't respond. There was nothing he could do within the rules that bound him. Henry's breathing turned erratic. His fingers clawed weakly at the blanket. Dad, his voice cracked. Don't let me. Richard grabbed his hand before he could finish. No. Don't say it. I'm getting you help. But the determination in his voice felt thin, like glass stretched too far. As another doctor walked by, Richard grabbed the man's arm. Please, I'm begging you. Save him. The doctor looked hesitant, conflicted. Even if I wanted to, he said quietly, I'm not qualified for this type of surgery. And if anything goes wrong, I'll lose my license. Richard tightened his grip. If he dies, you'll lose more than your license. You will lose whatever humanity you have left. The doctor recoiled, unable to meet his eyes, and hurried away. Richard staggered back toward Henry. His son was fading in front of him, breath by breath. The world around them blurred, the cold floors, the panicked whispers, the flickering lights, until only Henry's face remained sharp and real. Richard pressed his forehead to his son's arm. I won't lose you, he muttered. Not like this. Not because people were too afraid to help. He looked around at the sea of medical professionals who refused to act. A father's fear turned to fury, and that fury hardened into something sharper: resolve. If no one here would save his son, he would drag Henry to another hospital himself. He would fight through every corridor, every obstacle, every coward standing between Henry and survival. But before he could take another desperate step, the doors burst open again. A voice rang through the chaos, filled with certainty none of the doctors possessed. Let me through. I can help him! Heads turned sharply. Every eye in the room shifted toward the entrance, where a thin, weathered woman stood breathing hard, yet carrying an energy stronger than anyone else present. For the first time that night, Richard felt something stir, a flicker of hope, faint but unmistakable. Someone had finally stepped forward. Someone wasn't afraid. And she was looking directly at Henry. When the homeless woman first pushed her way through the doors, most people barely registered her presence. Riverside Medical Center was used to seeing all types wandering in from the Seattle streets, especially at night. Some came seeking warmth, others food, others simply wandered in confused. But this woman, frail, exhausted, wearing layers of mixed fabric that clung to her like a shield, moved with a purpose that immediately set her apart. She wasn't wandering. She wasn't confused. She was driven by something fierce and unwavering. Her eyes scanned the chaotic room with sharp precision, ignoring the startled gasps and wary glances from staff. And when those eyes locked onto Henry Brooks, everything else around her slipped out of focus. Amelia Harper had seen countless patients on the brink of death in the earlier years of her medical career. But nothing struck her as hard as the sight of Henry convulsing in pain on that gurney. Something deep inside her reacted with an urgency that felt almost primal. She rushed forward before any security guard or nurse could block her path. When she reached the center of the R, she raised her voice to cut through the noise.
Please. I can help him.
I know what's happening to that young man. I can operate. The room shifted. It wasn't quiet, but something changed in the atmosphere. People froze mid-step, eyes widening with a mix of disbelief and irritation. To them, she was just another desperate wanderer, making a scene, in a place where scenes happen far too often. A nurse near the triage counter sighed, rubbing her temples. "Miss, you can't be in here." Another nurse whispered to a colleague, "Why do they always come in yelling they can fix something? Get security." A security guard already started moving toward Amelia, but something about her posture, upright, firm, defiant, made him hesitate. She didn't look like someone seeking attention. She looked like someone who understood exactly what she was stepping into. Richard Brooks turned at the commotion. His grief-stricken expression hardened into something more guarded as he took in the disheveled woman demanding to help his son. His instinctive reaction was suspicion. Who was she? Why would a stranger, especially someone who appeared to have nothing, claim she could perform emergency surgery? But desperation does strange things to the mind, and Richard found himself watching her instead of dismissing her. Henry groaned again, pulling Richard's focus back to his son's deteriorating condition. His heart pounded painfully in his chest. Meanwhile, Amelia stood firm as nurses converged on her. "I need to get to that young man," she insisted, her voice layered with a conviction none of them expected. "I've seen those symptoms before. He's in the late stage of acute appendicitis, likely hours from rupture. If you don't act now, he will go into septic shock." One of the doctors, a woman in her early 40s, scoffed. "Everyone here knows that. What exactly do you think you're adding to this discussion?" Amelia stepped closer, unflinching. "I'm adding the solution. I'm a surgeon." A ripple of laughter followed short, sharp bursts of disbelief from several staff members. A paramedic muttered, "Yeah, and I'm the president." The security guard put a hand on her arm, but Amelia jerked away, eyes blazing. "I am a trained cardiothoracic surgeon. I can operate. I can save him." Her voice cracked not with fear, but with the unbearable weight of knowing the truth. She carried a truth no one here could see past her appearance to believe. Richard stared at her, conflicted. Everything about her seemed impossible. She didn't look like a surgeon. She didn't speak like someone accustomed to authority. She looked like the world had chewed her up and left her to survive on scraps. But the determination in her eyes wasn't something that could be faked. It reminded him of surgeons he'd met during medical fundraisers, people who lived for the rush of crisis, who possessed the rare ability to act under pressure without hesitation. Something about her stirred a strange flicker of recognition. Amelia noticed his uncertainty and seized the moment. "If you wait any longer, he will die." "I'm not guessing, I'm telling you what's about to happen." The medical team bristled, offended by the implication that she understood the situation better than they did. But beneath their irritation was the uncomfortable truth. She wasn't wrong. The attending physician snapped, "Miss, even if you were a surgeon, which I doubt, you have no credentials, no verification, no authorization. You cannot perform surgery here." Amelia's jaw tightened. "Then get someone who can." The physician looked away, unable to meet her challenge. Everyone knew no one was coming. That was the part no one wanted to say out loud. He needs help, Amelia pressed on, her voice rising with urgency. Right now you don't need credentials. You need skill. You need someone who actually knows what they're redoing. The doctor's face darkened. Nurses shifted uneasily. And then Henry screamed a piercing, gut-wrenching cry that sliced through every barrier, every argument, every doubt in the room. Amelia flinched as if the sound physically hit her. Richard snapped his head toward Henry, his heart free, falling. Henry's body arched again, his pulse spiking on the monitors. The nurse checking his vitals stumbled back in panic.
His pressure is crashing.
This is bad, really bad. Amelia took a single step toward the gurney. The security guard moved to block her, but Richard suddenly raised a hand. Wait. The guard froze, every nurse looked up. Even the attending physician paused mid-stride. Richard turned to Amelia slowly, his expression strained, desperate, and yet carefully evaluating. If you really a surgeon, he said, prove it. Amelia's breath caught, not from fear but from the rush of finally being heard. She reached into the worn canvas bag slung around her shoulder, an object that had become inseparable from her since the day her life collapsed, and pulled out a battered folder. She tossed it gently toward Richard. He caught it out of reflex. The folder was old, weathered from street life, but once he opened it, Richard's world tilted. Inside were laminated certificates, surgical logs, peer review publications, and recognition letters from Seattle General Hospital. The name was unmistakable, Dr. Camelia Harper, a former rising star, a surgeon whose success had once been splashed across Northwest medical journals, a woman whose career had vanished practically overnight. Richard flipped through the documents, breath unsteady. For the first time that night, the ear truly stopped. Those who saw the papers exchanged startled glances. The attending physician's face paled. Amelia stood quietly, watching Richard process everything. I wasn't lying, she said softly, please. Let me help your son. Richard looked at Henry again, his boy fading in front of him, and then looked at the woman who seemed carved from both despair and unbreakable resolve. His throat tightened. Hope was a dangerous thing, but it was all he had left. He exhaled shakily. Don't move, he said. Then he turned toward the stunned staff. Get her gloves, prep a room. Now. The words cut through the air with the force of someone used to being obeyed. Nurses snapped into motion despite their confusion. The attending physician sputtered in protest, but Richard glared at him, rage simmering in his eyes. If she's the only one willing to help, then she's the only one who will. Amelia felt her heartbeat thunder as the room shifted from resistance to reluctant action. She approached Henry, placing a gentle hand on his arm. I've got you, she whispered, though only she and Henry's fading consciousness heard it. And for the first time since entering the air, a sense of purpose steadied her trembling hands. The battle had only begun. The moment Richard ordered the staff to prepare a room, the air erupted into frantic motion. Nurses who previously avoided eye contact now scrambled to gather supplies, pushing carts loaded with sterile instruments and trauma kits. The attending physician still looked conflicted, hovering near Richard with the posture of someone who wanted to argue, but lacked the courage. Meanwhile, Henry's condition worsened by the second. His eyelids fluttered uncontrollably, his face drained of color, and his breaths turned shallow and ragged, each one sounding like it cost more than he had left to give. The beeping monitors surrounding him painted an even grimmer picture. Numbers were dropping, fast. Amelia hurried to his side, scanning the displays, assessing his breathing pattern, checking his abdomen with quick but skilled hands. The tension in her expression deepened when she felt the rigidity in his lower right side. He's minutes away from perforation, she muttered, mostly to herself. Then she looked up at Richard. We need to move now. Two orderlies unlocked the wheels on the gurney and started pushing Henry toward the surgical wing. Richard kept pace on the left side, his hand never leaving his son's arm. On the other side, Amelia walked with purpose, her step steady despite the storm of emotions brewing beneath her calm exterior. She had been in this position many times before, moving alongside a fading patient, calculating the odds while fighting to beat the clock. But tonight was different. Tonight she wasn't just fighting for a life. She was fighting for redemption. Every hallway they passed through felt like a painful memory. She'd once walked these very corridors as a respected surgeon, her white coat flowing behind her like a badge of honor. Colleagues used to greet her with admiration, nurses trusted her judgment, patients recognized her name. Now, guards eyed her suspiciously, and staff whispered as she passed. Unsure how to reconcile the fallen woman before them with the celebrated surgeon in the documents they'd just seen. As they rounded the corner, the surgical wing doors slid open. The overhead lights in the prep area glared down on stainless steel counters, polished equipment, and rows of neatly organized instruments. Everything was crisp, sterile, painfully familiar. The contrast between her appearance and this pristine environment struck her with brutal force. A nurse handed her a set of clean scrubs. "You need to change," the nurse said cautiously, studying Amelia's worn clothes. "You can use that restroom." Amelia nodded and stepped inside. The moment the door closed, she leaned against the cool tile and inhaled deeply. She hadn't worn scrubs in years. She thought she never would again. As she changed, each movement felt surreal. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Without the layers of street-worn clothing, she looked more like the surgeon she once was, though the fatigue and hardship still marked her face. But beneath that, she saw the spark she thought had died, the confidence of a woman who once saved lives daily. When she stepped out of the restroom, Richard was waiting. His face was tight with worry, but with something else to trust. "Are you sure you can do this?" he asked, voice low. Amelia met his eyes. "If I couldn't, I wouldn't be here." That answer was enough. The orderlies pushed Henry into the operating room, and Amelia followed with a surgeon's focus settling over her like a second skin. A scrubbed nurse approached her with gloves but hesitated. "Doctor, do you remember the protocols?" Amelia slid on the gloves with practiced ease. Better than anyone here. She moved to the sink, washing her hands in fast, precise motions, the muscle memory returning effortlessly. Another nurse whispered to her colleague, "She moves like a real surgeon." The other whispered back, "Maybe she is." Richard watched from behind the glass panel, separating the hallway from the OR. His heart pounded as he saw his son lying unconscious on the table, pale and vulnerable under the bright surgical lights. The anesthesiologist administered the medication, monitoring Henry's vitals closely. Amelia took her position at the operating table. Her posture straightened, her breathing steadied. The room sensed the shift. Even the nurses, still unsure whether to trust her fully, felt the confidence radiating from her. The attending physician who had previously doubted her stood at the doorway. "If anything goes wrong," he began. Amelia cut him off without looking up. "Then I take responsibility. But doing nothing will kill him. I won't let that happen." Her voice left no room for argument. The OR settled into its usual rhythm, machines humming, nurses preparing tools, the anesthesiologist monitoring Henry's airway. Amelia extended a hand, scalpel. The nurse placed it into her palm. The weight of the instrument felt achingly familiar. For a fleeting second, she remembered her first surgery as a resident, the trembling anticipation, the thrill of saving someone for the very first time. She was trembling now too, but for different reasons. This wasn't just another life. It was the life of a young man who had shown her kindness when she thought the world had forgotten her humanity. She made the incision with smooth, controlled precision. The nurses exchanged subtle glances. There was nothing hesitant about her technique, no uncertainty. She worked with the efficiency and accuracy of a surgeon who had spent years mastering her craft. Blood vessels were cauterized, tissue carefully separated, the abdominal cavity opened with meticulous care. Every move of her hands was deliberate, exact, confident. As she worked, the anesthesiologist called out Henry's vitals. "Pressure stabilizing, that's good. Keep going." Amelia nodded, eyes fixed on her task. She maneuvered deeper, locating the inflamed appendix. When she saw it, her expression hardened. It was swollen, dangerously close to rupturing. "We don't have long," she said. "Clamp." A nurse placed the clamp into her palm without hesitation this time. Behind the OR window, Richard felt something he hadn't felt all night: hope. He watched as Amelia moved around the operating table with the grace of someone born for this work. Despite everything, the accusations, the downfall, the years on the streets, she was still a surgeon. A damn good one. As she isolated the appendix, time seemed to tighten around her. Every second mattered. Every motion was critical. She secured the tissue, making the delicate cut needed to remove the organ. The moment she lifted it free, a collective breath passed through the room. "Appendix removed," she announced. "Prepare for irrigation. We need to flush the cavity to prevent infection." The nurses moved faster now, fully aligned with her. Confidence replaced doubt. The ear felt different, alive, purposeful. When she finished closing the last suture, Amelia stepped back, chest rising with controlled breaths. "He's stable," she said. The anesthesiologist checked the monitors. "Vitals look good." Richard's knees nearly buckled. He pressed a hand to the glass, overwhelmed. Amelia removed her gloves, her hands trembling, but not from fear, from relief. For the first time in years, she had saved someone again. But she had no idea how much this young man meant to her, and how much this surgery would change everything. The surgery was over, but the intensity hadn't left the room. Even as the nurses cleaned the instruments and the anesthesiologist monitored Henry's vitals, Amelia felt her pulse racing. Sweat clung to her forehead, and her hands trembled faintly, not from lack of skill but from the overwhelming weight of what had just happened. Saving a life used to be routine, a daily reality in her old world. Now it felt like stepping back into a life she had been violently torn away from. But beneath the adrenaline and exhaustion, something else flickered inside her, a quiet, stubborn spark she thought had died the day her entire life collapsed. She had saved him. Against every obstacle, against the disbelief, the hostility, the humiliation, she had saved Henry Brooks. As the staff wheeled Henry toward recovery, Richard Brooks moved away from the window and pressed both palms to his face. He stayed that way for a long moment, gathering himself, forcing the emotional wave crashing through him to settle enough so he could breathe. When he lowered his hands, his eyes glistened, though he fought to maintain composure. He wasn't a man who cried easily, but watching his son drift so close to death had stripped away any armor he had ever built. He turned as the doors opened, revealing Amelia stepping out in her scrubs, looking smaller now that the crisis had passed. She stood still, unsure of whether she should approach him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two people from opposite worlds bound by a single, life-changing moment. Richard didn't hesitate. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and reached for her hands. "Thank you," he said, voice strained. "You saved my son." Amelia swallowed hard. No one had spoken those words to her in years. Not since before the accusations, before the downfall, before she became someone society avoided. "He's not out of danger yet," she replied softly. "But the surgery went well. He should make a full recovery." Richard nodded, letting the relief wash through him. But beneath the gratitude, a new emotion stirred inside him, confusion. Who was this woman really? The documents he had skimmed before the surgery flashed in his mind. A talented surgeon. A prodigy. Someone whose name had once meant something in the medical community. And yet here she was, appearing out of nowhere as a homeless wanderer. Nothing made sense, but questions could wait. For now, his priority was Henry. The staff transferred Henry into a recovery room. Machines beeped around the bed, but the readings were steady now, no longer plummeting toward disaster. Amelia stood at the foot of the bed, watching him like a mother watching her child sleep. Her posture softened, the tension easing into something more vulnerable. For the first time since entering the she allowed her emotions to surface, if only slightly. There was something about Henry that pulled at her, something that struck a chord deep inside her chest. His face, the lines of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, everything felt hauntingly familiar. She pushed the thought away, or tried to. She couldn't afford to let herself believe in impossible things. Not yet. A nurse entered with paperwork, glancing nervously at Amelia. "We need the attending physician to sign off on the post-op forms." Amelia stepped back, suddenly aware she no longer had that role. The nurse turned toward Richard instead. "Brooks, we'll need your authorization as well." Richard nodded, quickly scribbling his signature before the nurse hurried off. When she was gone, he turned to Amelia again. "I want to understand what happened," he said. "Who you are. Why you're not working in a hospital." Amelia stiffened. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "It's a long story," she murmured. Richard's tone softened. "We don't have to talk about it now. I want you to know I'm grateful. And I want to help you if I can." She lifted her gaze, confusion flashing across her face. Help. That wasn't something she received from people like him. She lived a life where she avoided eye contact with men in expensive suits because those encounters almost always ended in judgment or fear. But Richard Brooks looked at her like she was someone who mattered, someone whose story deserved to be heard. It unnerved her, made her chest tighten. Before she could respond, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Nurses exchanged tense looks. The air shifted. and then the door swung open. Dahlia Brooks entered the room like she owned it because she did. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile, her tailored suit crisp and flawless, her expression poised in the practiced way of someone accustomed to power. But when she saw Amelia standing beside the bed, her polished facade cracked ever so slightly. Recognition flared in her eyes, cold, vicious recognition. "What is she doing here?" Dahlia's voice sliced through the room like a blade. Richard stiffened. "Dahlia, keep your voice down. Henry is resting." But Dahlia ignored him, stepping closer, eyes locked onto Amelia with the sharp focus of someone staring at a threat. "This woman is banned from Riverside, and for good reason." Richard stepped in front of Amelia. "She saved Henry's life." Dahlia blinked, startled, then snapped her attention to the chart at the foot of the bed. Her face paled as she read the post-op notes. "You let her operate." The words sounded like accusation wrapped in disbelief. Richard didn't back down. "Yes, because no one else would." Dahlia's jaw tightened. She turned toward Amelia, her composure cracking at the edges. "If something had gone wrong, this hospital would have been destroyed. You had no authority to touch him." Amelia held her posture firm, though her hands trembled. "If I hadn't touched him, he would be dead." The words landed heavy, undeniable. Dahlia's nostrils flared. She hated being cornered by logic. She especially hated being challenged by someone she believed beneath her. "You were lucky this went well," she said. "But don't think for a second this means you belong here." Richard bristled. "Dahlia, enough." Dahlia's eyes flicked toward him, a flash of annoyance crossing her features. She wasn't used to being corrected, especially not in front of staff. Turning back to Amelia, she lowered her voice but not her hostility. "You should leave before someone escorts you out." Amelia felt the old familiar ache return, the ache of being dismissed, unwanted, erased. But before she could speak, Henry stirred on the bed. His eyes opened weakly, and when he saw Amelia standing there, a soft flicker of recognition crossed his expression. He whispered, "You came back." His voice was faint, but it carried enough weight to silence everyone in the room. Amelia stepped closer, emotion tightening her throat. "I wasn't going to leave you." Dahlia's face hardened. She moved forward quickly. "Henry, sweetheart, you need rest. We'll take it from here." But Henry shook his head, small but firm. "I want her to stay." The request stunned the room. Richard's eyes softened, Amelia froze. And Dahlia's composure shattered completely. "Absolutely not," she snapped. "This woman is not staying in this hospital." But Henry, pale and exhausted, lifted his hand slightly, gesturing toward Amelia. "Please," he whispered. "She saved me." The sincerity in his voice cut through every argument, every power struggle, every barrier. Richard stepped beside his son, placing a hand on his shoulder. "If Henry wants her here," he said quietly, "she stays." Dahlia stared at her husband, disbelief turning to fury. But she couldn't contradict him, not when her stepson had nearly died. Amelia stood motionless, overwhelmed. She had expected to be shoved out, rejected as always. Instead, she found herself being asked to stay. Wanted. Trusted. For the first time in years, she belonged somewhere, even if only for this fragile moment. She didn't know yet that this moment would unravel truths she never imagined. Truths about Henry. Truths about herself. Truths that would change everything. For the next several hours, the hospital moved on with its usual rhythm, yet nothing felt usual to Amelia. Every corner she passed seemed to echo with memories she had tried to bury, years spent walking these halls with confidence. Years when she was celebrated instead of feared or judged. Now she hovered in the recovery area, like a ghost returning to a world that had forgotten her. Nurses moved around her hesitantly, unsure whether to treat her like a colleague or a stranger. A few offered nods of respect, while others remained wary, casting cautious glances as if unsure whether she truly belonged. But none of that mattered to Amelia. Her attention remained fixed on one thing, and one thing only: Henry. He slept peacefully under the soft glow of the recovery room lights. His breathing even and slightly raspy, but stable, solid proof that the surgery had succeeded. His chest rose and fell with a fragile steadiness, a rhythm that reassured her in a way she couldn't explain. She found herself watching the small movements of his eyelids, the shift of his fingers, the way he gripped the blanket even in sleep. She had seen countless patients recover before, but there was something different about watching Henry. Something that pulled at her in a deep, inexplicable way. Richard Brooks returned periodically, pacing, sitting, standing again, unable to settle for more than a minute at a time. Each time he looked at Henry, relief washed over him. Each time he looked at Amelia, gratitude clashed with curiosity. He wanted answers, needed them, but he wasn't ready to push. Not yet. For now, he was just a father grateful that his son was alive. Meanwhile, Dahlia remained conspicuously absent. She had stormed out earlier, after failing to force Amelia out of the hospital, and the staff quickly resumed their duties without further confrontation. But tension lingered, as if everyone expected her to reappear at any moment with new demands or accusations. Amelia didn't care about Dahlia's anger. She cared about Henry. Hours later, Henry stirred again, blinking slowly as he emerged from anesthesia. When he spotted Amelia seated in the corner, his lips curved into the faintest smile. "You stayed," he whispered. Amelia stood and moved to his bedside. "Of course I stayed," she replied, her voice softening despite her attempt to remain composed. "I needed to make sure you were okay." Henry studied her face for a moment with tired but curious eyes. "I knew you would help me," he murmured. "When you said you could save me, I believed you." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had lived so long without anyone believing in her that his trust felt foreign, overwhelming, almost painful. "You shouldn't put that kind of faith in strangers," she said gently. "But I'm glad you did." Richard entered the room then, pausing at the doorway when he saw the two of them speaking. His shoulders dropped in relief. "Hey, kid," he said with a shaky smile. "You scared the hell out of us." Henry let out a weak laugh. "Sorry about that." Richard walked to the other side of the bed and rested a hand on Henry's arm. Then he glanced at Amelia. "The doctors said you'll be fully recovered in a few days. You were lucky she was here when she was." Henry shifted his gaze toward Amelia again, his eyes softening. "I know." There was a pause long enough for Richard to gather his thoughts. He took a deep breath, then said, "Henry, I need to ask something important." Amelia instinctively took a step back, unsure whether she should excuse herself. But Henry spoke before she could move. "She can stay," he murmured. "Whatever you re-asking, she can hear it." Richard nodded slowly, accepting his son's request. Then he turned to Amelia with an expression that carried both gratitude and newfound determination. "Earlier you said you were a surgeon, a skilled one, but the staff seemed to recognize you for a very different reason. I want to understand why." Amelia's chest tightened. She had hoped this conversation would happen later after Henry regained strength, after she had time to prepare. But life never waited for perfect timing. She swallowed, her gaze drifting toward the floor. "I was a surgeon," she began quietly, "a good one. I trained at Seattle General. I had a promising career." Richard nodded, confirming what he'd read in the documents. "So what happened?" Amelia's eyes clouded with memories, painful, sharp, unavoidable. "My life fell apart because of lies," she said. "Lies that destroyed my reputation, my career, everything." She paused, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Someone wanted me gone. And they succeeded." Henry watched her intently, absorbing every word as if it were part of a story he felt connected to in ways he couldn't explain. Richard leaned closer, his brows drawn. "Who would do something like that to you?" Amelia hesitated. Saying the name aloud still felt like reopening a wound. "My sister," she finally whispered. "Dahlia." Richard froze, the connection clicked instantly, and disbelief washed across his face. "Dahlia Brooks." Amelia nodded. "My sister by blood. She helped ruin my career." The room seemed to tilt for Richard as he processed the revelation. "She never told me she had a sister," he muttered. "She never told anyone," Amelia replied. "Because it was easier to erase me than explain what she'd done." Henry frowned, trying to piece together the fragments. "Why would she do that to you?" Amelia exhaled slowly. "Jealousy, ambition, control. My father pushed us both our whole lives, but I was the one who excelled. When he found out I had a child, he believed I'd ruin his plans. Dahlia used that chance to take everything, my career, my reputation, even my identity." Richard's expression darkened with anger, but this time the anger wasn't directed at Amelia. "She let you disappear into the streets while she took over an entire hospital." Amelia nodded again, the truth of her words hanging heavy in the air. "Yes." Henry looked deeply unsettled. "You said you had a child," he murmured. "What happened to him?" Amelia froze. The question pierced her chest like a blade. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to form the words. Richard stepped in, sensing her struggle. "Henry, maybe we shouldn't," but Henry shook his head weakly. "No. If she wants to tell us, I want to hear it." Amelia forced herself to breathe. "I was told he died," she said quietly. "Right after birth. I never even got to hold him." She blinked away the burn behind her eyes. But I found out years later it wasn't true. Richard's breath caught. Henry's eyes widened. Amelia continued, voice trembling despite her attempts to stay composed. He was taken from me. Given away. All because my father thought motherhood would ruin my career. The room felt heavier, thick with shock, sorrow, and silent questions. Henry tried to sit up but grimaced in pain. So he could still be out there. Amelia nodded, her voice faint. Yes, but I don't know where, or who he became. She didn't add the thought screaming in her chest that she felt drawn to Henry for reasons she still didn't understand. That something in his face, his voice, his kindness felt too familiar to dismiss. She wasn't ready to say the words. Not yet. And Henry wasn't ready to hear them. Before anyone could speak again, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Richard stiffened, the staff turned nervous. Amelia felt dread settle in her stomach. Dahlia had returned. This time, she wasn't coming to argue. She was coming to destroy whatever fragile truth had just begun to surface. Dahlia Brooks hadn't been gone long, but when she returned, the atmosphere changed instantly. Her heels struck the floor with sharp, deliberate clicks that sent an uneasy tremor through the corridor. Everyone in her path stiffened instinctively, nurses straightening charts, residents stepping aside, orderlies pretending to look busy. Dahlia had a way of walking that made the hospital feel smaller, as though the building itself braced for impact whenever she entered. But tonight something was different. Her expression, normally polished and composed, was charged with fury. Not the loud kind, but the cold, simmering kind that promised destruction. When she pushed open the door to Henry's recovery room, she didn't bother pretending to be calm. Her gaze swept across the room like a searchlight until it landed on Amelia standing too close, too involved, too alive for Dahlia's liking. Unbelievable, Dahlia hissed, stepping inside. I leave for an hour and this is what I return to. You standing here as if you belong. Richard moved to intercept her, but Dahlia raised a hand sharply. Not now, Richard. She turned her attention back to Amelia. I told you to leave. I made it very clear. Amelia stayed still. Every instinct told her to shrink back, to protect herself, but she refused to give Dahlia that satisfaction. Henry asked me to stay, she said quietly. Dahlia's eyes narrowed with pure disdain. Henry doesn't know what he's asking. He's weak, sedated, not thinking clearly. And you, she pointed accusingly, her voice gaining heat. You have no right to be near him. Not after everything you've done. Richard stepped forward, anger finally breaking through his restraint. Dahlia, enough! She saved our son's life. Why is that so difficult for you to acknowledge? Dahlia whipped around to face him. Because she shouldn't have been here in the first place, she snapped. She is not licensed. She is not authorized. She is a liability. A walking disaster waiting to happen. Amelia felt each word like a blow, but she didn't move. She had endured worse, much worse. Dahlia turned back to her, eyes blazing. You should have disappeared years ago. You had your chance at a career and you threw it away. Don't drag this hospital down with you. Henry's voice, though hoarse and weak, cut through the tension like a blade. Stop. Dahlia froze. She turned slowly toward the bed, visibly startled. Henry rarely raised his voice, certainly not at her. Don't talk to her like that, Henry continued. She saved me. You didn't. The words struck deeper than he realized. Dahlia's face faltered. She quickly composed herself, but the crack in her composure was unmistakable. Sweetheart, she said, softening her tone, you re-upset, you re-confused, you don't understand the danger she created. She could have saved my life, Henry interrupted. Yeah, she did that. Richard couldn't hide the faint curve of satisfaction at the edge of his expression. He didn't enjoy conflict, but watching Dahlia lose her grip even slightly felt overdue. Dahlia steadied herself. She lifted her chin and turned back to Amelia. You think one surgery makes up for everything. You think it erases your past. Amelia held her gaze. No, nothing erases the past. Not yours, not mine. The implication hung heavy. Dahlia's expression tightened dangerously. You always had a talent for self-pity, she said through gritted teeth. Blaming everyone else for your failures. Richard's brows knit together. What is that supposed to mean? Dahlia didn't answer him. Instead, she took a step closer to Amelia, lowering her voice so only the three of them could hear. You should have stayed gone. You should have accepted your fate instead of dragging yourself back here like some stray dog hoping for scraps. Henry's heart tightened painfully at the cruelty in Dahlia's tone. Why are you talking to her like she's worthless? He demanded. Because she is worthless, Dahlia snapped before she could stop herself. The room went still. Even Dahlia seemed to realize she'd pushed too far. She exhaled sharply, smoothing her hair with a trembling hand. I didn't mean Richard cut her off. Yes, you did. He stepped in front of Amelia protectively. And I'm done pretending not to see it. You've been hiding things, Dahlia, important things. Dahlia flinched, but her voice remained sharp. Don't turn this into some conspiracy. She is manipulating you. She has always manipulated people. Amelia's eyes burned with restrained emotion. The only person who manipulated anyone was you, she said quietly. You and our father. Dahlia stiffened. Richard froze, staring at the two women. Your father. He repeated slowly. Dahlia shot Amelia a warning glare. Don't you dare. But Amelia didn't stop. He's your father too, she said. The words hung between them like thunder waiting to break. Richard's mind struggled to catch up. He looked from Amelia to Dahlia, searching their faces for truth. What is she talking about? He asked Dahlia. Dahlia's jaw clenched. She said nothing. Amelia answered instead. We were sisters, Richard, halfsters, same father. Different mothers. Richard's breath escaped in a stunned exhale. He turned to Dahlia. Is this true? Dahlia hesitated. Briefly. Barely. But it was enough. Richard's eyes widened with disbelief. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded. Because it wasn't relevant, Dahlia shot back. I have no obligation to share every unfortunate detail from my past. Unfortunate? Amelia repeated bitterly. That's what you call me. Dahlia glared at her. You ruined our family. You ruined everything you touched. You destroyed my life, Amelia said. You let them destroy me. You wanted it. The air grew thick with the weight of everything unsaid. Henry looked between the two women, his mind piecing together fragments he didn't fully understand. Amelia, what happened to you? What did she do? Amelia's chest tightened, but before she could answer, Dahlia snapped. That's enough, she shouted. I am not letting her spin this narrative again. She is unstable. She is dangerous. She should have been locked away years ago. Richard's eyes flashed with anger. Stop lying, he said. I saw her credentials. I saw her records. She was brilliant. So what happened? Dahlia's facade trembled under the pressure. She made mistakes, she insisted. Fatal ones. She couldn't handle the stress as she snapped. Amelia shook her head slowly. No, you framed me. You handed them evidence you knew was fabricated. You stole everything. Dahlia's face drained of color. She didn't deny it. Not fast enough. Henry's breath hitched. Wait, he whispered. You framed her. Dahlia turned to him desperately. Henry, you don't understand. I did what was necessary. She was spiraling. Amelia stepped forward, voice trembling with long, suppressed truth. The only thing I was guilty of was loving my child. And you took him from me. You let them take him. Richard's eyes widened. Henry felt a sharp twist in his chest. Dahlia looked furious, defensive, cornered. You brought that on yourself, she hissed. You were unfit. You were weak. Amelia's breath trembled. She met Dahlia's eyes with a quiet fury. I wasn't weak. I was betrayed. Richard looked between them, horrified. Your child, he murmured to Amelia. He's still alive. Amelia nodded, tears brimming. Yes, Richard steadied himself. Then we will find him, he said firmly. But Amelia didn't speak. She just stared at Henry long enough for him to feel something shift deep inside him. Something familiar. Something impossible. Dahlia noticed the exchange and fear flashed across her face. Real fear. Because she knew the truth long before either of them did, and she knew she could hide it much longer. The moment the room fell quiet, an invisible tension wrapped around all four of them. Henry lay still, struggling to make sense of the emotional storm unraveling mere feet from his bed. Richard looked shaken, as though the revelation of Amelia and Dahlia's shared past had knocked the air from his lungs. Amelia stood in the center of the room, her posture rigid yet vulnerable, as if bracing herself for another blow, and Dahlia, once composed, authoritative, untouchable, looked like a cornered animal. Her eyes darted between them, calculating, panicked, furious. She realized the balance of power in the room had shifted, and for the first time in years, she wasn't in control. Dahlia finally spoke, but her voice was tight, strained. This has gone far enough. I will not stand here and let you rewrite history. Richard turned sharply, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Then explain it, he demanded. Explain why you hid an entire sister. Explain why she was thrown away like trash while you rose to the top. Dahlia's lips curled. Because she deserved it. Henry flinched at the venom in her tone. Amelia exhaled slowly, fighting to maintain composure. What did I do, Dahlia? Other than exist? Dahlia's jaw clenched. You ruined everything the moment you got pregnant. Father had plans. You were supposed to follow them. Instead, you threw it all away. Amelia's voice trembled with restrained fury. I didn't throw anything away. I loved my child. That's not a crime. Dahlia scoffed, her bitterness spilling out like poison. Father didn't send you away because you loved him. He sent you away because you were unstable. You were emotional. You were unfit. You couldn't handle pressure. Pressure. Amelia repeated, disbelief coloring her tone. I handled pressure every day in the OR. I thrived under pressure. You know that. Dahlia snapped. You were weak. Richard stepped between them, his voice booming with anger. Enough. Dahlia's glare shot toward him, surprised by the force in his tone. You had no right to hide this from me, he said. You had no right to twist the truth. Dahlia crossed her arms tightly. It wasn't your business. Richard stared at her, stunned by the coldness of the claim. My son nearly died, he said, and the woman who saved him is the same one you tried to erase. How is that not my business? Dahlia opened her mouth to argue, but Henry interrupted, his voice faint but firm. Why would you do that to her? Dahlia turned to face the boy she raised as her own. Her expression softened for the briefest moment before hardening again. Henry, families make sacrifices. Your grandfather made choices for the greater good. Taking a baby isn't a sacrifice, Henry whispered. It's cruelty. Dahlia's expression twisted. You don't understand. The world is harsh. Amelia was reckless. She would have ruined everything. Amelia's shoulders sagged. You ruined me, she said softly. Dahlia took a step forward, eyes burning. You ruined yourself. Richard's patience snapped like brittle glass. He pointed toward the door. Get out. Dahlia recoiled. What? You heard me, Richard said. You're not helping. And until we sort out what really happened, you need to leave. Dahlia's face flushed with disbelief, then outrage. You re-choosing her side. A woman who barged into the hospital pretending she didn't pretend anything, Richard cut in sharply. She saved Henry, and she told the truth. Dahlia laughed bitterly. The truth, her truth. She's always been good at twisting stories. But the cracks in her voice betrayed her fear. She knew her grip on the situation was failing. Henry's voice broke through again, weak but determined. I want her here, not you. The blow hit Dahlia harder than any accusation. Her steps and her carefully groomed golden boy had chosen the stranger. The woman she despised, the sister she buried. Dahlia's mouth fell open but no words came. She simply stared at Henry, her expression a mixture of disbelief and devastation. And for a moment, just a moment, her humanity flickered through the armor she wore. Henry, she whispered. But Henry turned his face away. Dahlia straightened, cold resolve washing back over her features. Fine, she said with an icy calm that felt more dangerous than her earlier rage. If this is how it's going to be, then understand something. She looked directly at Amelia. You don't belong here. And you won't be here long. Richard stepped forward. Dahlia, she silenced him with a raised hand. You have no idea who she really is, Dahlia said. You know nothing about her past. Nothing about what she's capable of. Amelia's hands clenched at her sides. Tell them, she said. Tell them everything. Tell them what you did. Dahlia's smile was thin and sharp. I didn't do anything. You destroyed yourself. Then she turned on her heel and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The room exhaled as if it had been holding its breath. Richard sank into a chair, elbows on his knees, rubbing his face in disbelief. I can't believe this, he muttered. All these years she never said a word. Amelia stood motionless, her mind swirling with old wounds and new uncertainties. Henry reached for her hand. She startled, then slowly placed her hand in his. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if drawn together by something far stronger than coincidence. Henry looked up at her with soft, questioning eyes. Is it true? He whispered. Everything she said about your child. Amelia nodded slowly. Yes. Henry swallowed. And you never found him. Her voice wavered. I looked for years, but every door closed in my face. Every lead disappeared. Eventually I had nothing left, not even a place to sleep. Henry tightened his grip, as though trying to anchor her pain. I'm sorry, he murmured. No one deserves that. Amelia blinked back, a surge of emotion. It wasn't your fault. But as she looked at him, really looked at him, her heartbeat changed its rhythm. The shape of his eyes, the curve of his jaw, the way he held her hand with such warmth and instinctive trust, she felt it again. That impossible familiarity. The silent pull she couldn't explain. Richard noticed the way Amelia searched Henry's face with something deeper than concern. His brow furrowed with an intuition he couldn't yet articulate. Amelia, he said gently, is there something else you want to tell us? She opened her mouth, closed it, her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't ready to say it. Not until she knew for sure. But Dahlia, who had just stormed down the hallway, knew exactly what was coming, and she was determined to stop it before the truth finally came to light. The hallway outside Henry's room buzzed with tension long after Dahlia stormed off. Her fury lingered like a bruise in the air, invisible yet throbbing. Amelia stayed near the bed, her body still humming with adrenaline, though exhaustion pulled at her limbs. Henry held her hand as if afraid she might disappear if he loosened his grip, and Richard, still absorbing the revelations, paced the room in restless circles. Every time he paused, he looked at Amelia with a new blend of shock, compassion, and dawning suspicion. The pieces of his reality were shifting, forming a picture he wasn't sure he was ready to see. Amelia, he began carefully, there's something I need to ask. It might be painful, and I don't want to push, but he hesitated, searching her face. Your child. The one they took, how old would he be now? The question stole the breath from her lungs. She staggered slightly and lowered herself into the chair beside Henry's bed. Her hands trembled in her lap. 21, she whispered. He would be 21. Richard froze mid-step, his chest constricted around a single, impossible thought. He turned toward Henry, pale, recovering, barely clinging to consciousness, and then back toward Amelia. 21, he echoed. Henry blinked, confused. Dad. What's wrong? Richard's voice grew thick. Son, how old did you say you are again? Henry frowned. 21, why? The world seemed to stop spinning. Amelia felt her throat close. She looked at Henry not with the clinical assessment of a surgeon, but with the trembling hesitation of a mother who had lost everything and feared believing too hard. She traced the lines of his face with her eyes, the familiar shape of his nose, the softness around his eyes, the faint dimple in his cheek when he turned his head. All those features she had convinced herself she was imagining earlier now slammed into her consciousness with frightening clarity. Richard saw it too. His breath sharpened as he scanned Henry's features with new understanding. Amelia, he murmured, you said your father gave the baby away to a family somewhere in Seattle. Amelia nodded slowly, each movement deliberate, as if she feared one wrong gesture would shatter her completely. Yes. Do you know anything about the family? She shook her head. No, they erased all records. Made sure I couldn't trace anything. I had nothing, no name, no address, no way to find him. Henry swallowed, watching her with growing intensity. Amelia, he said softly, do you think? But he didn't finish. None of them did. The unspoken possibility hung between them with overwhelming gravity. Richard approached Amelia gently. We don't know yet, he said. We shouldn't jump to conclusions. There could be explanations. His voice trembled. It was clear he was trying to convince himself as much as her. Amelia felt the room blur around the edges. She clasped her hands together to steady them. I don't want to assume anything, she whispered. I've spent years imagining different faces, different lives. I can't trust my mind right now. Henry squeezed her hand, his brows knitting with concern. But if there's even a chance, he said. If there's even the smallest chance, we should know. Amelia looked at him, and her heart clenched painfully. His voice was warm, gentle, almost instinctively reassuring, exactly how she imagined her son would sound. I want to know, she admitted. But I'm terrified. Richard placed a steady hand on her shoulder. You've already survived the worst, he said. The truth can't hurt you more than what you've already endured. Amelia wasn't sure that was true, but she nodded anyway. Before any of them could speak again, footsteps approached the room, hurried, light and frantic. A nurse rushed in, slightly out of breath. Mir. Brooks, she said quickly, there's an issue. Richard straightened. What kind of issue? The nurse glanced nervously at Amelia, then Henry. It's about a request that was logged earlier. From Mrs. Brooks. Richard stiffened. What request? The nurse shifted uncomfortably. She asked for Henry's medical files to be pulled. All past records, birth records, adoption certificates. Amelia went rigid. Henry's eyes widened. Richard felt a chill crawl up his spine. She asked for adoption records. He repeated slowly. The nurse nodded, eyes wide with concern. Yes, she said it was urgent. Richard's expression hardened with realization. She knows, he said. She knows the truth is coming. Amelia felt her pulse spike. Why would she want those records now? The nurse hesitated. I don't know, but she left the hospital with the files. The entire room erupted in alarm. Richard's jaw clenched. She's hiding something, he muttered. She's trying to cover her tracks. Amelia felt the ground shift beneath her. She wouldn't, but she stopped. Of course Dahlia would. Dahlia had spent years crafting illusions, polishing her reputation, burying her past, tightening her grip on the hospital and everyone in it. The last thing she would allow was the truth tearing apart her carefully constructed life. Henry struggled to sit up. Dad, what if she took something important? Richard steadied him. She did. She took the truth. He turned to Amelia. We need to find those records. Whatever she's hiding, they might contain answers. Amelia nodded, though fear gnawed at her. We should talk to the hospital admin, or the legal department, or the... She stopped abruptly as the nurse raised a trembling hand. There's more, the nurse whispered. Mrs. Brooks made another request. Richard narrowed his eyes. What request? The nurse looked sick. She asked security to restrict access to certain areas of the hospital, especially the records department, and she ordered them to escort Harper out if she attempted to enter. Amelia's stomach dropped. Dahlia was closing the walls around her again, just like before, erasing her access, cutting her off from answers, pushing her back into the shadows. No, Amelia whispered. She won't do this again. Richard placed a protective arm around her shoulders. She won't, not this time. I won't allow it. Henry reached for Amelia's hand again. You saved me, he whispered. Now we're going to help you. Amelia's throat tightened with raw emotion. For the first time in over 20 years, someone wasn't dismissing her. Someone wasn't abandoning her. These two, father and son, stood beside her, ready to face the truth with her. Richard straightened, resolve sharpening his features. We're getting those records back, he said. No matter what Dahlia tries to hide. Henry nodded. And we'll figure out the truth about your son. Amelia's breath trembled. She looked from Richard to Henry, feeling something inside her shift, something powerful, terrifying, hopeful. She didn't know what the truth would reveal. But she knew one thing for certain: she would no longer face it alone. Outside the room, Dahlia Brooks walked briskly through the parking garage, clutching a stolen stack of files to her chest. Her hands shook not from guilt but from fear. Because for the first time, the lies she built were collapsing, and she knew exactly what those records would prove. She knew the truth Amelia wasn't ready to say. She knew who Henry really was, and she was willing to destroy everything to keep it hidden. Richard Brooks wasn't a man accustomed to feeling powerless, and as he stood outside Henry's recovery room, he made a decision that surprised even him. He wasn't going to let Dahlia manipulate the situation any longer. He wasn't going to let her bury truths, erase people, or rewrite history to protect herself. This time, he would fight back, for Henry, for Amelia, and for the truth that had been stolen from them both. He turned to the nurse who had brought the news. Where are the hospital administrators right now? The nurse swallowed. Most of them are in the West Wing office suite. But Mrs. Brooks already warned them not to authorize any requests from you or Harper until she returns. Richard's jaw tightened. She doesn't own this place, he muttered. She manages it. Amelia stepped closer, hesitance flickering across her features. Richard, she has influence here. More than you know. If she convinced the board that I'm a danger, you saved my son, he said firmly. That's all that matters to me. Henry nodded from his bed, and to me too. But Amelia wasn't convinced. She had lived through Dahlia's tactics. She knew exactly how ruthless her sister could be when cornered. She won't stop, Amelia murmured. She never does. If she feels threatened, she'll do anything to protect herself. Richard placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Then we stay ahead of her. He turned back to Henry. You rest. I'm going to find the administrators and get this sorted out. Henry reached for his father's hand. Be careful. Richard gave a tight nod and hurried out of the room. The moment he left, the lights above flickered faintly, an ordinary electrical hiccup, but enough to make Amelia tense. Hospitals had always made her uneasy since losing her career, but today the walls felt different. They felt like they were closing in, trying to push her back out onto the streets where Dahlia believed she belonged. Henry noticed her tension. Hey, he said quietly, you safe here? Amelia forced a smile. I'm not worried for myself. I'm worried for you. Henry blinked, touched. Why? Amelia hesitated. Because you feel like home. Because something in you reminds me of everything I lost. Because looking at you hurts and heals me at the same time. But she couldn't say any of that. Not yet. Because your stepmother isn't done causing damage, Amelia said instead. Henry grimaced, shifting painfully against the pillows. I never thought she was capable of something like this. I mean, she always tried to control things, but framing you. Taking your child, how could she do that to her own sister? Amelia sighed, lowering herself into the chair beside him. She didn't see me as family. She saw me as competition. Our father taught us that success was more important than anything, including each other. Henry frowned. That's messed up. Yes, Amelia whispered it was. A shadow crossed Henry's expression. What was he like, your father? Amelia's stomach twisted at the memories. Powerful, strict, brilliant, cold. He believed perfection was the only acceptable standard. He wanted us to be extraordinary. But he wanted Dahlia to be obedient. And he wanted me to be untouchable. Henry studied her face. And when you got pregnant, Amelia nodded, her eyes falling. He said I threw my future away. He said I embarrassed him, humiliated him, that I ruined the Harper legacy. Her voice wavered. I didn't even get to hold my son. They told me he died in the delivery room. I found out later it was a lie. They gave him away. Henry felt something twist deep inside his chest, an ache he didn't understand, pull he couldn't explain. Amelia, he said softly, if your son were here right now, what would you say to him? Amelia's breath caught. She looked at Henry with eyes that glistened with a lifetime of unspoken love. I'd tell him I'm sorry, she said. Sorry I didn't fight harder. Sorry I let them convince me I was powerless. I'd tell him I've missed him every single day. And I'd tell him that no matter where life took him, I loved him before he even had a name. Henry swallowed hard. A warmth spread across his chest, mixed with something sharper, something like recognition. He had always felt different growing up. Always felt something was missing. A hollow space he couldn't explain. A restlessness that never went away. Looking at Amelia, he felt that hollow space shift. Like something was finally clicking into place. Before he could say anything, the door burst open. A security guard stepped inside with stiff posture and an apologetic look. Dar Harper, he asked. Amelia stood quickly, tension snapping back into her shoulders. Yes. The guard hesitated. I've been instructed to ask you to step out into the hallway. The administrators need to speak with you. Henry tried to sit up. No, she's not going anywhere. The guard held up both hands. I'm not here to escort her out. I'm just delivering a message. His eyes flicked to Henry, then Amelia. Mr. Brooks, your father, he requested this. He's waiting with the administrators. He asked for you to join them immediately. Amelia exhaled shakily. Relief and anxiety collided inside her chest. I'll go, she said. But Henry grabbed her wrist. Don't let them push you around, he whispered. Not again. Amelia covered his hand with hers. I won't. When she stepped into the hallway, the guard led her through a series of winding corridors, past walls lined with framed certificates and staff photographs. Amelia recognized none of the faces. New doctors, new administrators, new leadership. Her world had moved on without her. Finally, they reached the administration suite. The lights glowed warmly, the furniture sleek and modern. Behind the glass doors, Richard stood in the center of the room, speaking urgently with 3 administrators. When he saw Amelia, he immediately motioned her inside. There you are, he said. We need you. The administrators looked uneasy but respectful. One of them, a tall woman with silver hair, stepped forward. Drer Harper, thank you for coming. Amelia braced herself. What's going on? The administrator exchanged glances with her colleagues, then met Amelia's eyes with a grave expression. We need your help locating files that were taken without authorization. Amelia's breath hitched. The records Dahlia stole. Yes, the administrator confirmed. Richard stepped closer. We told them everything. They know Dahlia removed documents illegally. They were willing to help us retrieve them. Amelia felt a weight lift slightly from her chest. Do you know what was in the files? She asked. The administrator hesitated. Not everything, but the documents included patient birth records from 21 years ago. Adoption transfers. Restricted information tied to a confidential case. Amelia's heart pounded. My son's case, she whispered. Richard nodded. Yes. The administrator straightened. Dr. Harper, we believe Dahlia took those records because they connect you to someone you may not be aware of. Amelia felt her knees weaken. Richard reached out, steadying her. They believe, he said softly, that the records tie to Henry. The words hit her like a physical force. She grabbed the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. In a trembling voice, she whispered, Are you saying Henry? The administrator nodded. Yes, we believe Henry may be your biological son. Amelia felt her world tilt, shatter, and reassemble all in the same breath. She covered her mouth with a shaking hand. tears spilling before she could stop them. Richard's voice was quiet but filled with awe. "Amelia, I think we found him." And somewhere in the city, Dahlia clutched those same files against her chest, fully aware that the truth had finally caught up to her. Amelia felt the room spinning around her. The administrator's words replayed in her mind like an echo she couldn't silence. "Henry may be your biological son." For 21 years she had carried a hollow ache in her heart, a wound that never healed. She had imagined her child thousands of times, wondering where he lived, who raised him, whether he was safe, happy, loved. And now he had been here all along, alive, breathing, just a few rooms away. The truth she had chased through years of grief had been living under the same roof as Dahlia Brooks. Richard moved toward her with surprising gentleness, resting a steadying hand on her back. "Amelia," he said, keeping his voice soft, "I know this is overwhelming. We will take this one step at a time." But Amelia couldn't speak. Her throat tightened as a sob threatened to break through. She pressed a shaking hand over her mouth, trying to contain the flood of emotion rushing through her. Relief, love, terror, anger. All of them collided inside her like waves crashing against a weak shoreline. How could she do this? Amelia finally whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. "How could she take him from me? How could she hide him all these years?" Richard exhaled, his expression darkening with guilt and fury. "She didn't just hide him," he said. "She raised him. As if he were hers." The words felt like a blade twisting deeper. The administrators exchanged troubled glances. One stepped forward cautiously. "Druter Harper, we believe Dahlia was involved in forging documents. The adoption records, they were altered. They were signed under false pretenses." Amelia's heart dropped. "She signed them?" "Yes," the administrator continued. "It appears she posed as a legal guardian in place of your father. She arranged for the baby to be transferred to a private agency. The trail ends there except for one crucial detail: your child was placed with a financially capable family in Seattle. A family Dahlia had ties to." Richard closed his eyes as the realization sank in. "My family." Amelia stared at him, tears gathering. "You mean she gave him to you?" "To my father," Richard corrected quietly. "He and I were estranged at the time. He made decisions without my involvement. When he passed years later, Henry was already in the system legally as my adopted son." His voice shook. "I had no idea." Amelia's breath hitched. She felt both relief at knowing Henry was loved and rage at knowing she had missed every moment of his life. His first steps, his first words, his first day of school. Every milestone stolen by secrets. "She built her life on my loss," Amelia whispered. "She took everything from me." The administrator cleared her throat carefully. "We need proof to confront her formally. Without the files she took, this is only circumstantial. But if we recover them, we can expose everything." Richard straightened, determination burning behind his eyes. "Then we find them." Meanwhile, across the city, Dahlia Brooks drove with white-knuckled hands gripping the steering wheel. The stolen folder rested on the passenger seat, its papers threatening to spill. The parking garage lights had already faded behind her, replaced by the cold night glow of Seattle's skyline. Her breath came fast and uneven. She had spent decades making sure this truth never resurfaced. She had buried it under lies, forged documents, and manipulation so precise it should have been airtight. But Amelia's return, her survival, had shattered everything. She pulled into a secluded alley, heart racing. Storm clouds gathered above the tall buildings, reflecting in the puddles at her feet as she stepped out of the car. She snatched the folder, flipping through it with frantic fingers. Birth records, transfer papers, signatures, dates. All the evidence that tied her to one unforgivable act. "No," she muttered, pacing. "I won't let her ruin everything. Not again." She remembered her father's disappointment every time Amelia outperformed her. His thin-lipped expressions of pride reserved only for the daughter who didn't need approval. His quiet pressure to mold Dahlia into something she could never be, something Amelia always was. Amelia was the prodigy, the star, the perfect daughter. Until she made a mistake Dahlia could exploit. That pregnancy had been Dahlia's opportunity, and she took it. "I saved our family," Dahlia whispered to herself. "I did what needed to be done. I gave that child a better life, a richer life, a safer life." But her voice shook. Did she really believe that? Or had she built her lies so carefully that she'd started believing them herself? Back at the hospital, Amelia took a deep breath, wiping her tears. "I want to see him," she said. "I need to look at him again." Really look at him. Richard nodded, of course. He guided her gently back down the hall. With every step, Amelia's heart pounded harder. She felt like she was walking toward a dream she had forced herself to stop dreaming. A dream she feared might shatter the moment she touched it. When they reached the room, Henry was sitting up slightly, his cheeks flushed with effort, eyes wary but alert. He looked between their faces, noticing the tension written across both. "Did something happen?" he asked. Amelia stepped closer, unable to hide the tears she had tried so hard to suppress. "Henry," she whispered, "I need to ask you something. Something important." Henry's brows drew together. "What is it?" Amelia hesitated. She didn't want to frighten him. She didn't want to overwhelm him after the trauma he had just survived. But the truth was too heavy to hold alone. "Do you know anything about your adoption?" she asked gently. Henry blinked. "My adoption?" Amelia exchanged a glance with Richard, then continued. "Were you told anything about your biological mother? Or where you came from?" Henry shook his head slowly. "Dad told me my grandparents adopted me after my biological parents couldn't care for me. That's all I ever knew." Richard swallowed hard. "Henry, I think there's more to it than that." Henry's pulse quickened. Confusion and something else filled his eyes. "More? Like what?" Amelia whispered. "Like the possibility that your mother didn't give you up willingly." Henry's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Amelia's voice trembled. "I mean, I think I might be your mother." The room froze. Henry stared at her, shock rippling across his face like a ripple in still water. He searched her expression, looking for any sign that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, anything to anchor him. But all he saw was truth. Raw, vulnerable, terrified. "Your mother," he whispered. Amelia nodded, tears spilling freely. "Yes, I think you re my son." A tremor ran through Henry's body. He lifted a hand to his chest, trying to steady his breath. "But how? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Richard answered softly, "Because Dahlia made sure no one could. She kept the truth buried." Henry shook his head, overwhelmed. "This is too much." He stopped, emotion choking his words. Amelia reached for his hand gently. "I know, I'm sorry. I never wanted you to learn this way. I never wanted you to be hurt. I've waited 21 years to find you." Henry looked at her, really looked, and something inside him shifted. A recognition that went beyond physical resemblance. A connection he couldn't deny. But before he could respond, a voice erupted from the doorway. "She is not your mother." They turned to see Dahlia standing there, her face pale, her eyes wild. And in her hand, trembling, desperate, was a shredded corner of Henry's file. She had heard everything. And she wasn't done fighting. Dahlia's words struck the room like an electrical surge, sharp and destabilizing. Her voice cracked with a mixture of panic and rage, but what made everyone freeze was the wild look in her eyes. She stood in the doorway, clutching the torn remnants of Henry's file, her chest rising and falling rapidly as though she had run the entire length of the hospital. Her makeup, once perfectly composed, now appeared smudged around the edges, and her usually immaculate hair clung to her forehead in loose strands, a fragile mask slipping under the pressure of the truth. Henry stared at her, stunned. The shock that had begun moments earlier intensified, pushing through the numbness spreading across his chest. "Dahlia," he whispered, "what are you doing?" Instead of answering, Dahlia stepped inside and slammed the door behind her, as if trapping the truth inside the room where she could suffocate it before it spread any further. She jabbed a finger toward Amelia, her voice shaking. "She is lying to you. Manipulating you. She has always been this way." Richard moved between them instinctively, protective barriers rising inside him. "Dahlia, stop," he said. "No one here believes your lies anymore." Dahlia flinched, genuine hurt flashing across her face before it hardened into fury. "You believe her over me?" she demanded, a woman who showed up off the streets, pretending she's some fallen hero. "She is using all of you. And Henry, especially Henry." Henry's breathing tightened. He looked at Amelia, then back at Dahlia, struggling to align his emotions with the chaos unfolding. "Tell me the truth," he said, voice trembling. "Did you know about my adoption? Did you know who my mother was?" Dahlia's expression shifted, but not into guilt, into calculation. She took a breath, preparing her next move. "I knew your biological mother couldn't care for you," she said. "You were neglected. You were unwanted. I stepped in. I saved you." Amelia inhaled sharply, disbelief and heartbreak colliding inside her. "I never neglected him," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "You took him from me before I had the chance to hold him. Before I even knew he was alive." Dahlia scoffed. You weren't fit to be a mother then. You were unstable. You could barely take care of yourself. Henry's jaw tightened. How would you know that? He asked. You weren't there. Dahlia's gaze flickered. Your grandfather told me everything. My grandfather. Henry asked slowly. Richard looked at Dahlia, horrified. You spoke to Amelia's father. You worked with him. Dahlia's silence was the only answer they needed. Amelia felt a cold wave move through her. You always wanted his approval, she whispered. Even after he cast me aside. Dahlia snapped. He did what was necessary. You were ruining everything he built, everything we depended on. Someone had to clean up your mess. My mess, Amelia repeated, emotion rising in her chest like a tide. My baby was not a mess. Henry felt the words hit him like a weight. Something inside him cracked open. Amelia met his gaze again, tears threatening to spill. You were the most important thing I ever had, she whispered. I never wanted to lose you. For a moment, Henry believed her. He felt it in her voice, in the trembling sincerity that reached past logic and pierced something deep inside him. But Dahlia wasn't finished. She stepped closer, desperation fueling every word. Henry, she said, you are not her son. You are mine. I raised you. I protected you. I gave you the life she never could. Henry blinked, searching her face for the truth he had believed for years. Dahlia's eyes glimmered with something raw, but beneath it was a darkness that had been hiding for decades. She is not your mother, Dahlia repeated. I am. No, Henry whispered. You re not. Dahlia's lips parted in disbelief. The truth she had never wanted to face now stared her in the eyes. The boy she raised was slipping away from her. Henry, she murmured, sweetheart, listen, why didn't you tell me I was adopted? He asked, voice cracking. Why didn't you ever tell me the truth? Because you didn't need it. She snapped. You had me. You had a life. A future. She would have destroyed you. Amelia's voice rose, filled with pain and conviction. He had a right to know who he is. Dahlia turned on her. He had no right to the chaos you brought with you. Chaos you caused, Amelia shot back. Everything wrong in my life traces back to you. Dahlia's voice trembled with frustration. I didn't ruin your life. You ruined mine. You overshadowed me in school, in training, in our father's eyes. And when you got pregnant, that was supposed to be your downfall. But even then he still pitied you. He still protected you. Amelia shook her head. He didn't protect me. He punished me. And you helped him. Dahlia flinched, but she didn't turn away. I did what was necessary. To whom? Richard demanded. To yourself. Her expression froze. He was right. Every decision she had made, including taking Henry, was for one reason: to protect her standing. Her power, her image. He is not your son, she spat, Amelia, clinging to the last thread of control. He has never been your son. Henry stared at her, heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear his own thoughts. So who am I? He said. Dahlia hesitated. That hesitation destroyed her. Henry's breath quickened. Who am I, Dahlia? Her face paled. For the first time since the confrontation began, she looked terrified. Because she knew the truth. Because she knew the truth would break her world. Because she knew she could no longer contain it. Henry, she whispered, you are my son as far as the world is concerned, but biologically. He pressed. Silence. Uneasy, suffocating silence. Then Amelia stepped forward, unable to hold back the truth any longer. You are mine, she whispered. You are my son. Dahlia's eyes widened, panic rippling across her expression. No! She shouted. You are not his mother! You are nothing! The words cut through Amelia, but they didn't break her this time. She looked at Henry, with tears tracing down her cheeks. I loved you, she whispered, before I ever saw your face. Before I ever knew your name. Henry felt something shift inside him, a connection beyond logic, something older than memory. Something undeniable. He reached toward Amelia with a trembling hand, and she instinctively reached back. The moment their fingers touched, Dahlia broke. No! She screamed, lunging forward. Richard caught her by the arm, holding her back. This ends now, Dahlia, he said firmly. No more lies. Dahlia's breath came in rag bursts. You all fools, she spat. You think this truth will save you. It will destroy you. But she no longer had the power to stop it. Not with the truth finally standing in the open. Not with Henry turning away from her for the first time in his life. And not with Amelia, his mother, holding his hand at last. The room was still vibrating with the force of Dahlia's breakdown. Her scream lingered in the air like smoke after an explosion, hanging heavy, choking the space with the remnants of her collapsing lies. Richard held her firmly by the arms, keeping her from lunging again. She thrashed once, twice, then froze, her chest heaving, eyes blazing with a mixture of desperation and denial. Across the room, Henry and Amelia remained holding each other's hand, their connection fragile yet fiercely undeniable. Henry could feel Amelia's fingers trembling, not out of fear, but from the overwhelming flood of emotions she had been forced to suppress for 21 long, brutal years. He squeezed her hand gently, grounding her, grounding himself. Although his mind struggled to process the truth, his heart reacted before logic could catch up. "Let go of her, Richard," Dahlia demanded, though her voice wavered. "This isn't over. I won't let you ruin everything I built." Richard's expression hardened. For years he had tolerated Dahlia's Ruth leadership style, her harshness, her need for control. But now, seeing the truth laid bare, he felt disgust swirl in his chest. "You didn't build your life," he said quietly. "You stole hers." Dahlia's eyes widened with offense.
I raised him,
she cried. "I gave him everything, a home, stability, a future."
What did she give him? Nothing.
She didn't even know he
Existed.
Amelia flinched, but didn't look away. "I didn't know because you and our father took him," she said, her voice cracking. "You robbed me of motherhood. You robbed him of the truth." Dahlia shook her head violently, as if trying to shake the truth away.
I protected him.
"No," Henry said, his voice firm, though still weak from the surgery. "You protected yourself." Dahlia blinked, startled by the certainty in his tone. He had never spoken to her like that, not once in his entire life. His next words tore straight through her composure. "You never wanted what was best for me. You wanted control. You wanted the image of a perfect family, not the truth of it." Richard released Dahlia slowly, though he stayed close in case she tried to lash out again. Dahlia straightened herself, smoothing her clothes with shaking hands. Her eyes darted around the room, frantic, uncertain. She had always been the woman with answers, the woman with solutions, the woman who never lost. Now she was unraveling before her husband and the son she claimed as her own. Richard turned toward Amelia. "We need proof," he said gently. "Real proof. The record she took can confirm everything." Amelia nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes." But Dahlia laughed suddenly, a sharp, broken sound that made Henry shiver. "You think you'll ever see those files again?" she sneered. "You think I'll let you destroy me with them?" Amelia stiffened. "What did you do with them?" Dahlia's smile twisted. "They were gone." Henry's stomach dropped. "Gone, burned," she lied, "or maybe threatened. Destroyed. You will never have the evidence." Richard stepped toward her, fury threatening to break his restraint. "Where are the files, Dahlia?" "You will never find them," she said, lifting her chin in defiance. "You will not tear my life apart over something that happened decades ago." Amelia's voice trembled with a different kind of fear, not for herself, but for her son. "Henry has a right to know his truth," she whispered. "He has a right to know who he is." Dahlia scoffed. "He knows who he is, my son." "No," Henry said, louder this time, his voice shaking with emotion. "I'm not your son. Not in the way that matters." The words pierced Dahlia straight through the chest. She staggered back, her hand flying to her heart, as if to protect something fragile inside her. For the first time she looked truly broken. "Henry," she whispered, "don't say that." But he didn't look away. "You lied to me my entire life." She stepped toward him, hands shaking. "I did what I had to do. For us, for you." "You did it for yourself," Henry said. "You did it because you couldn't stand the idea of someone else being chosen over you." Amelia felt her breath catch at the accuracy of his words. Dahlia's eyes filled with tears, hot, angry, unwilling tears. "I loved you," she whispered, the words torn from her. Henry's expression softened only slightly. "I believe you cared for me," he said gently. "But you didn't love me the way a mother should. A mother doesn't lie to her child about who he is." Dahlia broke, then truly broke. Her knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Her sobs shook her shoulders violently. The sound was raw, unfiltered, and horrifyingly human. She had lived her entire life behind armor, behind perfection, behind ambition so thick she believed it made her untouchable. Now, the armor cracked open, revealing the frightened, insecure woman she had always been beneath it. Amelia wanted to feel anger. She wanted to feel triumph. But watching her sister crumble stirred something else inside her, a sadness she couldn't name. Despite everything Dahlia had done, she had once been just another girl trying to survive under the crushing expectations of their father. Amelia closed her eyes briefly, remembering the little sister who used to follow her through the house, trying to prove she was just as capable, just as brilliant. Richard placed a hand on Amelia's shoulder. "What do we do now?" he asked quietly. She opened her eyes slowly. "We find the truth," she said. "We prove it, for Henry's sake." Henry nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on Dahlia. "And then?" he asked softly. Amelia inhaled deeply. "Then we start over as a family." Henry looked at her, emotion swelling in his chest. "Mom," he whispered. The word fell from his lips naturally, instinctively, before he could stop himself. Amelia's breath shattered. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, "I'm here." Dahlia lifted her face from her hands, her eyes swollen and red. She stared at the mother and son standing together, and she broke again, quieter this time. "He was supposed to be mine," she whispered. "He was supposed to love me." Richard stepped toward her gently. "He did love you, but love built on lies can't last." The room fell silent as Henry leaned into Amelia's embrace, resting his head lightly against her shoulder. Amelia held him with a gentleness that came from decades of yearning. She stroked his hair as if she were memorizing the feel of it, her fingers trembling with every stroke. Dahlia looked away, unable to watch. For the first time in her life, she had lost. Not because someone defeated her, but because the truth she buried refused to stay dead. Outside the window, rain began to fall, slow at first, then harder, washing the city in a steady rhythm. Inside the room, the storm of secrets had finally broken open, leaving destruction in its wake, but also clearing space for something new. Something honest, something healing. And for the first time in 21 years, Amelia held hope in her arms. The rain outside intensified, tapping steadily against the hospital windows as if echoing the turbulence unfolding inside. The storm had rolled in quickly, darkening the skyline and blurring the city lights into streaks of color. Inside Henry's room, however, another kind of storm was settling, not loud, not violent, but quiet and raw, built on years of buried truth and broken identities finally surfacing. Amelia remained seated beside Henry, still holding him like she feared he might vanish again if she let go. Henry leaned into her with the hesitant, but instinctive yearning of someone rediscovering something he had never known he was missing. His pulse, though still weak from surgery, had found a new steadiness, one that matched the rhythm of Amelia's heartbeat. Across the room, Dahlia sat silently in the chair she had collapsed into, her posture crumpled, her face hollow. The earlier hysteria had drained from her, replaced now with a numb, vacant disbelief. She stared at nothing, eyes unfocused, unable to reconcile the reality she'd been forced to face. Every part of her life, her status, her reputation, her control had been built over the lie she now saw slipping beyond her grasp. Richard kept a careful distance from her. Not cold, not cruel, just distant, like someone quietly stepping away from a fire that had burned too hot for too long. He had loved Dahlia once, or at least believed he had. But now he realized he had been loving the version she allowed him to see, the version sculpted from ambition, fear, and calculated charm. The truth beneath was something darker, twisted by envy and desperation. But this was not the time to address the ruins of their marriage. Right now, everything revolved around the fragile new reality unfolding between Amelia and Henry. Richard stepped closer to the bed. "We'll need to verify everything," he said gently. "Officially, legally. DNA testing, paperwork, everything. Not because we doubt you, Amelia, but because Henry deserves an identity no one can challenge." Henry nodded, still overwhelmed. "I want to know," he said softly. "I want to know everything." Amelia brushed a hand through his hair, tears clinging to her lashes. "I will tell you everything," she whispered. "Every truth they stole from us." It was then that Dahlia finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "You think this is over?" she murmured. Her tone wasn't sharp or furious this time, it was empty, worn, defeated. "Even if you get your precious test, it won't change anything." Amelia turned toward her slowly, her expression no longer furious but somber. "It changes everything." Dahlia laughed weakly, shaking her head. "You think he'll ever see you as his mother? You think you can step into a role I spent 21 years building?" She looked at Henry, her eyes glassy. "You are my son. I raised you, not her." Henry swallowed, emotion tightening his throat. "You raised me," he agreed quietly. "But you didn't tell me the truth. You didn't give me a choice. And that's something a mother shouldn't do." Dahlia flinched. The words landed deeper than any scream could have. "I didn't have a choice," she whispered back. "If I told you everything, everything would fall apart." "It fell apart anyway," Henry said. Silence pressed down on the room, thick and heavy. Dahlia wiped her face with trembling fingers. Everything I did for us. Richard stepped forward. You didn't do it for us, he said. You did it for control, for power, for image. Dahlia's shoulders sagged. Maybe, she admitted. Maybe I was afraid. Afraid he'd leave if he knew the truth. Afraid she'd come back and take him from me. I wasn't trying to take him, Amelia said softly. I didn't even know he was alive. You made sure I couldn't find him. Because you didn't deserve him. Dahlia snapped suddenly, though the rage behind it was fractured, broken. You were weak, emotional, reckless. You weren't fit to be a mother. Amelia held her gaze, tired of bending under that old lie. I wasn't weak, she said calmly. I was grieving, and you took advantage of that. Dahlia's composure cracked again, but her voice softened to something almost childlike. But he chose me, she whispered. He loved me. Henry inhaled sharply. I did, he said. But I didn't know who I was loving. Those words were the final blow. Dahlia's breath hitched, her chest rising shakily. She looked down at her hands that had held Henry through fevers, scraped knees, nightmares, hands that had lied every day of his life. She began to tremble. If I lose him, she whispered, I have nothing left. Richard watched her with a strange mixture of sympathy and sorrow. You could have been honest, he said gently. We could have worked through anything if you had trusted us. Dahlia shook her head slowly. You never would have stayed if you knew what I'd done. Maybe not, he acknowledged. But that's not the point. You didn't give anyone the chance. Amelia stepped closer, not in forgiveness, but in honesty. You didn't lose Henry because of me, she said quietly. You lost him because of your lies. Dahlia closed her eyes. A tear slid down her cheek, carving a thin line through the foundation she wore. I know, she whispered. I always knew this day would come. I just didn't think it would hurt like this. Henry watched her, torn between anger and grief. I don't hate you, he said softly. Dahlia's eyes flew open. Hope flared and then dimmed when he added, but I can't trust you right now. You hurt both of us. You need to understand that. Dahlia lowered her gaze, breaking completely. I understand, she whispered. Amelia returned to Henry's side. He leaned against her, finding comfort in a connection that felt strangely natural, as if their bond had been waiting beneath the surface all his life. Richard watched them with quiet awe, seeing the truth settle into place with undeniable clarity. After several minutes he finally spoke. We need to figure out the next steps, he said. Legal, emotional, everything. Dahlia, you will have to face consequences. She didn't argue, her voice was a shadow. I know. A quiet calm settled over the room, not peaceful, but necessary. The kind of calm that comes after the hurricane has stripped everything away, leaving only truth behind. Amelia looked at Henry again, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. We'll take it slow, she whispered. Henry nodded, his voice steady for the first time since the revelation. We'll figure it out together. Dahlia turned her face toward the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. Richard moved to call the hospital's legal department. Amelia remained with her son holding his hand, memorizing the feel of it, the warmth, the truth. And for the first time in 21 years, beneath the storm outside and the ruins of lies inside, a new beginning quietly took shape. The storm outside finally began to ease, but inside the hospital the air remained heavy with everything that had been revealed. Secrets had been ripped into the open. Lives had been broken and reshaped. And yet, despite the devastation, a fragile thread of hope wound its way through the room, thin, trembling, but undeniably real. Henry drifted in and out of light sleep as the anesthesia lingering in his system grappled with the emotions flooding his mind. Each time he opened his eyes, he saw Amelia beside him, her hand resting gently on his. She didn't move from that spot, afraid, perhaps, that if she let go, reality might shift again and take him with it. Afraid that morning would come and reveal this was just another dream she didn't get to keep. Richard returned from speaking with legal and administrative staff, closing the door quietly behind him. His expression was solemn but resolved. It will be handled, he said softly. The board has been notified. They're beginning an internal review of everything Dahlia was involved in. He paused, letting out a breath. It won't be pretty, but it's necessary. Dahlia didn't respond. She remained seated in the same chair, staring at the floor with eyes dulled by exhaustion. Her earlier fire had burned out, leaving behind only ashes. For the first time, she seemed small, no longer the towering figure of authority she projected, but a fractured woman with nowhere left to hide. Amelia's voice broke the silence, though it was barely above a whisper. What happens now? Her grip on Henry's hand tightened. Richard walked closer to them. Now, he said gently, we give Henry time to recover. And then we take things step by step. He looked at Amelia, softening. I want you to be part of this process. You deserve that. Henry stirred, opening his eyes. I want that too, he murmured, surprising even himself with the clarity of his conviction. I want you here, Amelia. She brushed his cheek with trembling fingers, unable to keep the tears from her eyes. I'll be here, she whispered, as long as you want me to. Dahlia finally looked up, her voice faint, almost fragile. And what about me? The question hung awkwardly in the air. Henry turned toward her slowly. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't soft either. You need help, he said truthfully. You need to face what you've done. And I can't pretend nothing happened. Dahlia's throat bobbed as she swallowed, fighting the instinct to argue. I didn't want to lose you, she whispered. I was scared. Amelia's heart softened for a split second because she recognized that kind of fear. The fear of being forgotten. The fear of losing your place in someone's life. But compassion didn't erase damage, and it didn't rebuild trust overnight. Fear doesn't excuse what you did, Amelia said softly. You stole something that can't be returned. Dahlia's eyes glistened. I know. The admission came out cracked but honest. I know. Henry exhaled slowly, closing his eyes for a moment. I'm not going to cut you out of my life completely, he said. Dahlia gasped softly, hope rising. But, he continued, I need space, and I need the truth. All of it, no more lies, no more manipulation. If you want a place in my life, you have to earn it back. Dahlia nodded, tears spilling freely now. I'll try, she whispered. And for the first time, the words didn't feel like a performance, they felt real. As real as the wreckage she now had to confront. Richard guided her gently toward the door. We need to sign documents, he said, and there are meetings you must attend. Consequences you will need to face. Dahlia didn't resist. She paused once, turning back to look at Henry, her expression soft and shattered. I'm sorry, she whispered. Then she let Richard lead her out. When the door closed behind them, silence filled the room again, this time softer, warmer. Amelia leaned closer to Henry. How are you feeling? She asked gently. Henry met her gaze with eyes still tired but full of something stronger than before, belonging. Like everything just changed, he said. And somehow it makes sense. Amelia smiled through her tears. I know the feeling. He watched her, studying her features with a new sense of wonder. Do I look like you? He asked quietly. Amelia let out a soft laugh, broken and emotional. You look exactly like the boy I imagined every night for 21 years, she whispered. But better, so much better. Henry felt tears prick his eyes. I don't remember you, he said. But something inside me feels like I knew you anyway. Like I've been waiting for you. Amelia pressed a trembling hand to his cheek. I've been waiting for you too, she said. Every day. Even when I didn't have hope left. He reached for her hand again, this time intertwining their fingers with certainty. Can we start over? He asked. Can we try? Amelia nodded, breathless. Yes, she whispered. We can start anywhere you want. They stayed like that for a long time, mother and son relearning each other in the quiet glow of the recovery room. Outside, the storm clouds began to drift apart, leaving faint streaks of moonlight shining on the wet asphalt. When Richard returned, his expression softened at the sight of them. We'll figure out the legal proof in the coming days, he said. Tests, corrected paperwork, everything that was stolen from you. He paused. But no matter what those documents say, it's clear what the truth really is. Henry nodded. Amelia, still emotional, simply squeezed his hand again. Richard continued, You're not alone anymore, Amelia. You have a place here. With us. Those words broke whatever was left inside her. She hadn't belonged anywhere in so long that she had forgotten what belonging felt like. And now she had a family, not one built on lies, but on truth finally brought to light. Henry rested his head against her arm, sleepy but comforted. Good night, Mom, he murmured. Amelia's breath caught. Her eyes flooded again. Good night, sweetheart. When he drifted to sleep, she watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, the same rhythm she'd dreamed of for 2 decades. The truth had been painful. The journey had nearly destroyed her. But in the end, she had found her son. And he had found her. For the first time in 21 years, Amelia Harper felt whole. The story of Amelia, Henry, Richard, and Dahlia is ultimately a story about truth, how fragile it is, how easily it can be buried, and yet how powerfully it resurfaces no matter how deep the world tries to hide it. One of the most profound lessons is that truth has a rhythm of its own, and it waits, it watches, and it endures. Lies might offer temporary protection or the illusion of control, but they always carry a cost. Dahlia built her entire life on deception, believing she could construct a perfect world by rewriting the past and controlling the present. But in doing so, she shackled herself to a lie that slowly hollowed her from the inside. Her downfall teaches that no matter how tightly one clings to a fabricated reality, it will eventually crack beneath the weight of authenticity longing to be seen. And when it breaks everywhere, exposing not only the lie but the loneliness of the liar. Amelia's arc teaches something deeper. Resilience isn't always loud or spectacular. Sometimes resilience is surviving the days when the world forgets your name. It's enduring humiliation, rejection, and erasure, and still holding on to the faintest spark of who you once were. Amelia lost everything: her career, her reputation, her stability, and the child she believed had died. Yet even in the darkest parts of her journey, she clung to compassion, decency, and purpose. She never let cruelty turn her cold. Her lesson is that identity is not destroyed by hardship, it is revealed by it. You can be cast out, broken down, and left with nothing, yet still rise with your integrity intact. Amelia's return to the operating room was not just a medical triumph, it was the reclamation of her voice, her agency, and her right to exist in a world that tried to erase her. Henry's journey teaches that identity is not shaped solely by the circumstances of your upbringing, but by the courage to confront the truth when it shatters the life you thought you knew. He grew up believing one narrative, unaware that the strings of his life were pulled by someone else's fear. But when confronted with the truth, he didn't reject it. He didn't hide. Instead, he opened himself to the pain and the beauty of discovery. His lesson is about the bravery required to redefine yourself, to look at the people you love and still choose honesty over comfort, growth over familiarity. Henry teaches that even when truth is painful, it is the only foundation strong enough to build a life upon. Richard's role highlights another lesson. Love isn't about control, it's about accountability, recognition, and choosing what is right even when it is uncomfortable. Richard spent years believing Dahlia's curated version of reality, never questioning the cracks beneath the surface. But when faced with evidence that contradicted everything he knew, he chose justice over loyalty, truth over convenience. His lesson is that real strength lies not in power, but in humility, the willingness to admit when you've been wrong and the courage to correct the course. He reminds us that being a protector is not about enforcing your world, but about defending others when their world collapses. And then there is Dahlia, a character who, despite her wrongdoing, exists to teach one of the most painful and important lessons, that jealousy and fear can rot the foundations, even the most carefully built life. Dahlia wasn't evil at her core, she was insecure, desperate for validation, desperate to be seen as worthy. Her flaw was believing that someone else's light dimmed her own. Instead of confronting her feelings, she weaponized them. Instead of seeking healing, she sought control. Her tragedy is a warning: when you fear being less, you're already losing pieces of yourself. When you act from envy instead of empathy, you trade connection for dominance, and that's a bargain no one wins. Together, these characters form a lesson about family, that blood alone doesn't define it, but truth, healing, and courage do. The reunion between Amelia and Henry wasn't just emotional, it was symbolic of what happens when broken pieces finally find the place they belong. Their bond couldn't be erased by lies or time, it was written beneath everything, waiting to be rediscovered. Their lesson is that belonging isn't something granted, it's something uncovered. Something earned through love, acceptance, and honesty. The story also teaches that the past is powerful but not immutable. It can wound, haunt, and derail us, but it does not own us. Amelia's past nearly destroyed her, but it also forged her into someone stronger, someone compassionate, someone who refused to let injustice define her worth. Henry's past was kept from him, but when he learned the truth, he didn't collapse, he expanded. Dahlia's past twisted her, but even she, in her final moments of breakdown, revealed the truth of her humanity. She wasn't a monster, just a wounded soul who chose the wrong path. The overall message becomes clear: healing begins the moment truth is allowed into the room. Forgiveness, too, appears in the cracks of the story, not as absolution for wrongdoing, but as a bridge toward understanding. Henry forgiving Dahlia, even partially, shows that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's a way to free yourself from the prison built by someone else's choices. Amelia choosing not to hate Dahlia, despite everything, shows that compassion can survive in even the most fractured heart. Their forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, but it prevents the pain from owning them. Ultimately, the lesson of the story is that truth liberates, love restores, and courage rebuilds. Even when darkness lasts for years, 21 years in Amelia's case, the moment you step toward the truth, the world shifts. What was stolen can be returned, what was broken can be mended, and what was lost can be found again. And sometimes in the quietest, most unexpected moments, life gives back everything it once took away. If you find this video helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming videos. If you have any suggestions or questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear your feedback. Thank you for watching until the end.